To be honest, the connection didn't take long to spark. As soon as Jimi gave him a taste of that unearthly sound, they fell into a deep rhythm almost immediately, though I must admit I initially felt the accompanying band left something to be desired. Eric Clapton has walked the earth for decades, surrounded by the absolute titans of the music industry, cementing his own status as a living deity of the guitar. However, there is a single spectral bond that continues to haunt the fringes of his storied existence, a fleeting but earth-shattering brotherhood with Jimi Hendrix. Their connection was a rare alchemy forged in the fire of 6 strings, amplified by burning stages and symbolised by a tragic final gift that was never delivered. As the years etched deep lines into Clapton's features and age softens the edge of his voice, the burden of this specific memory does not lighten. Conversely, it becomes more piercing. Hidden inside a quiet, undelivered gesture is a narrative that refuses to fade into the black. A story not merely of competition or homage, but of profound words that were left hanging in the air, forever unsaid. Now, with the clarity of hindsight, we reopen the pages of a chapter that has never truly closed for him, a tale of one left-handed Fender Stratocaster, one fateful evening, and a silence that screams louder than any amplifier. One has to wonder how would the tapestry of rock history have been woven differently had the clock stopped for just a moment. This is the origin story of a legend. Jimi Hendrix possessed a gravitational pull toward melody from the very start, famously strumming a battered broomstick and pretending it was an axe long before his fingers ever grazed a fretboard. He came of age in a working-class African-American household, navigating the treacherous waters of a segregated United States, where racial and cultural fractures were at their breaking point. The young Hendrix endured a chaotic childhood marred by severe instability and poverty that would have crushed a lesser spirit. Yet these traumatic early years dug a deep reservoir of emotion within him, fueling the electrifying raw vulnerability that would eventually become the signature of his sonic identity. Upon graduating from high school, Hendrix sought a way out and enlisted in the United States Army. He earned his wings training as a paratrooper with the prestigious and tough-as-nails 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. While the military drilled a rigid ironclad discipline into his bones, the strict regimentation only served to amplify his desperate hunger for unrestricted artistic expression. Following a medical discharge that cut his service short, Hendrix threw himself into the pursuit of music with a singular obsessive focus. During the gritty early days of the 1960s, he ground out a living on the Chitlin circuit as a hired gun for rhythm and blues giants like Little Richard and the Isley Brothers. He used this time to hone his lethal skills, often to the annoyance of band leaders, who found his flashy, unorthodox playing style and wild improvisation to be a distraction from the main act. But this fierce individuality, while a liability in the rigid world of backup dancing and matching suits, was laying the groundwork for a seismic cultural shift he was preparing to unleash. The turning point arrived in September of 1966 when Chas Chandler, the bassist for The Animals, discovered Hendrix in the Raw. He was tearing up the stage at Café Wah in New York City's Greenwich Village, a diamond in the rough waiting to be polished. Chandler whisked Hendrix away to London, convinced that his talent was an alien force unlike anything the guitar world had ever seen. Teaming him with Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell, the Jimi Hendrix Experience was born. Their sound was a potent hallucinogenic cocktail of blues, hard rock, soul and psychedelia that completely mesmerised the British musical aristocracy. When Hendrix dropped his debut single, Hey Joe, it didn't just chart, it exploded onto the United Kingdom's airwaves as a bona fide smash hit. This was quickly followed by the sonic bombshells of Purple Haze and The Wind, Cries Mary cementing his reputation as a formidable powerhouse that could not be ignored. By 1967, Hendrix unleashed the album Are You Experienced, a record widely regarded as one of the most devastatingly powerful debuts in the history of rock and roll. It represented the perfect collision of cutting-edge studio wizardry and unparalleled technical innovation on the guitar. This masterpiece placed Hendrix squarely at the forefront of the counterculture revolution, sprinkling its psychedelic magic dust over the closing years of the 1960s. His ritualistic burning of his guitar at the Monterey Pop Festival transcended mere performance, elevating him to the status of a transatlantic icon and a martyr for the music. Tragically, few careers in the commercial sphere have been as brief as Hendrix's, spanning a flash-in-the-pan duration of just under 4 years. Yet the inferno he ignited in the name of art was an eternal flame, his struggles and meteoric ascent permanently altering the DNA of rock music for all time. Just as he was finding his footing, destiny provided a platform that would shatter the status quo forever. This is how Jimi Hendrix sent shockwaves through the heart of London. When Jimi Hendrix touched down in London in 1966, he didn't just step into a swinging music scene. He arrived like a meteor. He detonated a creative nuclear device that shook the foundations of British rock. At a private showcase organised by Chandler at the Bag O' Nails Club, Hendrix played a set so ferocious it stunned the room into a terrified silence. The audience that night was not just a crowd, it was a gathering of royalty featuring the biggest names in British music. The guest list included heavyweights like Keith Richards, Mick Jagger, Jeff Beck, and Paul McCartney, all watching with dropped jaws. Whispers spread like wildfire across the city that an extraterrestrial talent had landed, marking that night as the true genesis of Hendrix's rise as a revolutionary figure. However, the moment that truly solidified Hendrix's status as a mythical creature was his audacious impromptu appearance with the supergroup Cream. At the time, Cream was viewed as the absolute pinnacle of musicianship, the Mount Olympus of British rock guitar. During a gig at the Regent Street Polytechnic in London, Hendrix boldly approached the stage and asked if he could jam with the gods. With an effortless, unnerving cool, he plugged his Stratocaster directly into Jack Bruce's bass amplifier and tore into a scorching, high-octane version of Howlin' Wolf's Killing Floor, a track even Clapton found difficult to master. The sheer arrogance and ease with which Hendrix dismantled the complex piece sent a shockwave through everyone in the room. His lightning speed, technical brilliance and flamboyant showmanship left the band members, particularly Clapton, visibly trembling. Clapton later confessed that witnessing Hendrix that night was a paradoxical experience, simultaneously terrifying and utterly awe-inspiring, as if watching the future arrive to claim its throne. It was a moment of absolute humility for a man who had spent years seeing his name spray-painted across London walls next to the word God. But Hendrix did far more than just impress the locals. He completely shattered and reconstructed the entire concept of what a 6-string electric guitar was capable of achieving in human hands. The spectacle he unleashed upon that stage wasn't merely a display of technical virtuosity. It was a seismic event, a raw and visceral experience that seemed to physically warp the atmosphere inside the venue. Jimmy was viewed as an unstoppable force of nature, with bassist Jack Bruce famously noting the distinct difference. Eric was a master guitar player, but Jimmy was something else entirely. While Eric was a musician, that fateful evening triggered a psychological shift among Britain's elite performers who suddenly understood they were facing a completely new and terrifying musical hierarchy. You have to understand that Hendrix didn't travel all the way to London just to chase a pot of gold or to plaster his face on the cover of glossy music magazines. His primary motivation was far purer. He crossed the ocean specifically to hang out and trade licks with his personal idols Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck. In a staggering span of just a few weeks, he didn't just manage to meet his heroes, he ascended to their level and, in the eyes of many, instantly surpassed them. The electric charge generated that night didn't remain trapped within the club's 4 walls. It radiated outward, permanently altering the swagger, attitude and very sound of the British rock and roll scene. As the legendary music journalist Keith Altham vividly remembered, he found Clapton backstage afterward, his hands shaking as he furiously tried to drag on a cigarette. He was completely shell-shocked, muttering quietly to himself in disbelief, "You never told me he was actually that good." That specific day signalled the true arrival of the Jimi Hendrix mythology in Great Britain, forging a connection built on pure sonic power. The collision between Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix in the swinging London of 1966 was far more significant than a random meeting of 2 talented guitarists. It marked the genesis of a deep, complex and emotionally charged brotherhood. Hendrix, fresh from the gritty streets of New York, wasted zero time stamping his authority on the Capitol. Instead of retreating into a shell of jealousy or rivalry, Clapton opened his arms, welcoming this American phenomenon with a sense of genuine awe and admiration. While the rest of the cutthroat music industry might have viewed Hendrix as a dangerous threat to the status quo, Clapton looked at him and saw a true kindred spirit. He found a brother who cherished the blues with the same religious intensity, yet channeled it in a way that felt like it was from both the distant past and the far future. The energy Hendrix projected was a beautiful form of chaos, utilising an approach to the instrument that was simultaneously radical, dangerous, and deeply soulful. Clapton possessed the ear to recognise not only the flash and technical brilliance, but the profound emotional agony and depth buried within Hendrix's fretwork. The two icons bonded, rapidly united by their obsessive respect for the old blues traditions and a relentless hunger to smash through existing musical boundaries. They didn't always need to fill the air with words. Their guitars did the heavy lifting, having conversations that spoke volumes about trust, creativity, and mutual understanding. Their relationship blossomed quietly in the shadows, away from the prying eyes of the tabloid press, rooted not in business deals, but in a deep, intuitive connection. They would often be found sharing late nights at obscure clubs, just two friends soaking in the atmosphere. They spent countless hours backstage together, sharing private jokes and moments of vulnerability that the documentary cameras never managed to capture. Hendrix always showered Clapton with praise, even as he was busy rewriting the rulebook of rock guitar, showing a humility that belied his wild stage persona. For his part, Clapton felt incredibly privileged to know the man behind the headband, a person of immense heart, gentle humour, and an old soul. This friendship was defined by mutual admiration, but it also had a tangible impact on Clapton's own artistic journey and evolution. The raw emotional honesty that Hendrix poured into his lyrics and melodies sparked a change in Clapton, opening an avenue for playing that embraced vulnerability over technical perfection. The devastating tragedy of Hendrix's premature death in 1970 must have struck Clapton with a force that very few people could ever truly understand. The crushing weight of their planned meeting on the very night Hendrix passed away, a rendezvous that never happened, is heartbreaking to consider. That missed connection transformed into a bleeding emotional scar for Clapton, a wound that remained raw for the next 3 decades or more. Since that time, Clapton has spoken very sparingly about Jimmy, usually with a visible sadness in his eyes, as if protecting the sanctity of their private bond. For Eric, the loss of Hendrix was not simply a case of the music world losing a talented performer. He had lost a companion who made existence more vibrant and whose presence made his own art significantly richer. It brings us to the story of the guitar Clapton never got to give him. Deep in the heart of London's explosive rock scene in 1966, the arrival of Jimi Hendrix was a cultural earthquake that reshaped the landscape forever. And perhaps nobody felt those tremors more acutely than Eric Clapton himself. Although Clapton had long sat on the throne as Britain's premier guitar god, Hendrix's breathtaking talent didn't incite a war. Instead, it forged an unbreakable alliance. Their relationship, constructed on a foundation of love rather than competition, deepened with every passing month. By the time 1970 rolled around, Clapton looked upon Hendrix not merely as a musical equal, but as a legitimate brother in arms. Born from this profound connection, Clapton made a deeply personal gesture, tracking down and purchasing a rare left-handed Fender Stratocaster specifically for Jimmy. It was a simple purchase, yet it was heavy with symbolism, a token of respect, camaraderie, and the silent language shared between two giants of the instrument. This magnificent gift was scheduled to be delivered personally on the evening of September 17th, 1970. Clapton and Hendrix had arranged to meet up at a Sly Stone concert in London to enjoy the music and catch up. It was supposed to be just another gathering, a casual hangout that would mark another chapter in their enduring friendship. But fate intervened in the most cruel and absolute manner imaginable. Hendrix never walked through those doors, and the guitar case remained unopened. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the silence at the Samarkand Hotel was deafening, marking the moment he was discovered lifeless, the victim of a catastrophic cocktail of sedatives and spirits. That pristine left-handed Stratocaster, which Eric Clapton had selected with such immense care and loaded with unspoken admiration, was destined to remain forever untouched by the legendary fingers of Jimi Hendrix. Instead of making music, the instrument transformed into a gut-wrenching artifact of sorrow, a physical symbol of a meeting that fate cancelled and a friendship severed in the blink of an eye. For a devastatingly heartbroken Clapton, that six-string beauty morphed into a haunting totem of grief, a pain so deep he could rarely bring himself to articulate it. On the very few instances he has actually spoken about that dark period, you can hear the undeniable crack of heartbreak in his tone. The true emotional burden wasn't merely about a gift that was never unwrapped, but rather the crushing finality of death that Clapton found himself completely unable to escape or rationalise. What he was truly grieving was the vaporisation of a shared future, the jam sessions that never happened, the late-night talks that were silenced, and the thousands of potential memories wiped from the timeline. Every single time his eyes drifted toward that white Stratocaster, it served as a brutal reminder not only of the otherworldly genius Hendrix possessed, but of the genuine human connection that was just starting to solidify between them. It was a brotherhood cut down right as the first buds of friendship were opening up. Today, that silent instrument hangs as a ghostly link to a history that still torments Clapton to this day. It stands as a testament to a musical alliance that, had it survived, would have likely reverberated through history books for centuries, but also of a deeply personal bond that was brimming with optimism and mutual respect. For Clapton, the sudden loss of Hendrix and the sight of that abandoned guitar brought the fragile, fleeting nature of existence into sharp, terrifying focus. He can almost hear the phantom notes of a collaboration that never was feeling the weight of the loss in every pause that stretches on a little too long. All that remains is the shadow of Hendrix's memory and the tragic present that never found its way into the hands of its intended owner. This is the story of how the demons of addiction finally quieted Jimi Hendrix. Even as he ascended to the absolute pinnacle of global icon status, the crushing weight of celebrity was slowly squeezing the life out of him. The wild psychedelic rock god the public saw confident, flamboyant and invincible was merely a costume hiding a man who was spiritually and physically depleted. Once he stepped out of the spotlight and the roar of the crowd faded, Hendrix was left wandering through a dark maze of personal demons and professional chaos. In those final turbulent months before the tragedy, his daily existence was a minefield of anxiety compounded by a messy paternity court case, increasingly toxic friction with his manager, Michael Jeffrey, and a bitter energy-draining war over his recording contracts. Piling onto this mountain of stress was the sheer exhaustion from a relentless touring schedule and the media's insatiable appetite for his time. Away from the cameras, Hendrix was a man running on fumes, his soul fraying at the edges, leading him down a path of increasingly dangerous coping mechanisms. Even though he was sitting on top of the world with millions of adoring worshippers, Hendrix found himself locked in a prison of loneliness that seemed to get smaller every day. As he entered the last few weeks of his life, his body was failing him, battered by chronic fatigue and a stubborn flu that he just could not shake. You could see the cracks forming in his live shows. The performances that were once legendary for their precision were becoming erratic and strained. To get through the days and nights, he leaned heavier and heavier on chemical crutches, specifically mixing booze with strong sedatives, despite knowing his system was fragile. Regardless of the risks, he kept popping sleeping pills, desperate to outrun the severe insomnia that haunted his nights. His inner circle watched with growing dread, but Hendrix was notoriously guarded, locking his pain away where no one could reach it. It felt as though the very industry he had revolutionised was now closing its jaws around him, leaving him no sanctuary. The evening of September the 17th, 1970 began as just another Thursday. He was staying at the Samarkand Hotel in London, holed up in the apartment of his girlfriend, Monica Danneman. It was meant to be a night of recovery and sleep, but it twisted into a nightmare from which there was no waking up. By the next afternoon, the icon was found unresponsive. The post-mortem examination unveiled a grim and heartbreaking sequence of events. He had asphyxiated after his body rejected a toxic mix of red wine and a massive amount of Vesprax sleeping tablets, ingesting 9 times the recommended safe limit. The coroner ruled it a verdict of death by misadventure, essentially an accidental overdose. The tragedy highlighted a fatal collision between untreated mental fatigue, physical illness, and a reckless approach to pharmaceuticals. At his core, Hendrix was a human being ground down to dust by the very fame machine that had elevated him to the stars. Almost instantly, the rumour mill went into overdrive. Whispers of murder began to circulate largely because Hendrix had been aggressively trying to fire his management team and settle his lawsuits, leading some to theorise that his exit was convenient for certain powerful figures rather than accidental. As late as 1993, Scotland Yard was petitioned to reopen the files, yet no new evidence has ever surfaced to change the official narrative. However, stripping away the conspiracies, the gut-wrenching reality that hangs over music history is that we lost a once-in-a-century genius, not in a blaze of glory, but in a slow, lonely fade into the dark. Today, Jimi rests at the Greenwood Memorial Park in Renton, Washington, beneath a marker that simply reads "Forever in Our Hearts." His passing stands as a stark, sombre warning that even the brightest burning stars are not immune to burning out. It is often said that true brilliance can burn itself out when paired with an unbearable emotional burden. And behind every wall of sound sits a fragile human being simply desperate to be heard, even when the room goes silent. Yet even after he left the building for the final time, the fire that Jimi Hendrix started left permanent scorch marks on the culture, and there was one man in particular who followed that trail of smoke to find his own salvation. Let us talk about the massive shift in Eric Clapton's musical compass. When Jimi Hendrix crash-landed onto the London scene back in 1966, it was not merely a new musician arriving in town. It was a seismic, earth-shattering cultural event that completely rewired the public's understanding of what an electric guitar could actually do, changing the instrument's destiny forever. For a purist like Eric Clapton, who had painstakingly built his reputation as a god based on surgical technical brilliance and a devout worship of traditional blues, the arrival of Hendrix was equal parts inspiring and terrifying. Clapton had been worshipped by fans and critics alike for his pristine tone, his delicate touch, and his academically faithful recreations of the American blues masters. But then came Hendrix, approaching the fretboard from a completely different dimension, ignoring all the rules Clapton held dear. Rather than simply paying homage to the tradition, Hendrix took the blues, twisted it into knots and stretched it out into something cosmic, wild and utterly untamed. He treated the Stratocaster not just as a wooden tool for playing melodies, but as a visceral vehicle for raw emotion in its most chaotic and human form, a radical perspective that quietly began to seep into Clapton's subconscious. The metamorphosis in Clapton's style was not an overnight occurrence, but the sheer boldness of Hendrix planted a seed of rebellion that would slowly blossom over the years. Moving away from the rigid precision that defined his early career, Clapton started wading into the messy, dangerous and uncharted waters of experimental tone and heavy improvisation. Landmark albums such as Disraeli Gears and The Explosive Wheels of Fire clearly reflected a musician who was suddenly willing to embrace sonic experimentation and step out of his comfort zone. The toolkit expanded dramatically with wah-wah pedals, fuzz boxes, heavy distortion, and layered psychedelic textures, all beginning to spice up his previously clean sound. Hendrix had proven to the world that imperfection could be stunningly beautiful, that taking a risk was electrifying, and Clapton took those profound lessons to heart. His guitar solos became less about displaying technical mastery and speed, and more about communicating a deep feeling, often veering into wilder, more unrestrained sonic territory than he ever dared before. Perhaps the most dramatic shift in Clapton's artistic trajectory was his newfound willingness to display emotional vulnerability. While Hendrix had famously turned feedback, static and noise into artful expressions of political unrest and personal longing, Clapton began to chip away at the polished veneer of his own playing, allowing the cracks, the pain and the rawness to shine through the mix. The introspective, gut-wrenching ache that pulses through tracks like Layla and other tales of unrequited love owes just as much to Hendrix's emotional honesty as it does to Clapton's own personal tragedies. With technical perfection now seeming distant and less important to Clapton's evolving art, emotive fragility, existential questioning and deep yearning became the paramount focus in his guitar lines, his lyrical content and his musical arrangements. In the long, quiet years that followed the tragic death of Hendrix, Clapton would remain steadfastly loyal in his reverence for the fallen icon. It is rare to see Clapton mention the name of Jimi Hendrix to a public audience without hearing a slight tremor of heavy emotion breaking his voice. And yet the influence remained undeniable in every tremulous bend of a string and in every single moment where pure feeling eclipsed the need for perfection. Hendrix had successfully shattered the illusion that technical mastery was enough. He had shown the world that truly great music required absolute surrender. Clapton's own artistry continued to grow and flourish through this silent, ghostly mentorship that transcended Hendrix's short time on Earth. It was not just the notes Hendrix played that changed Clapton, but the very spirit of the man. The spirit that reminded him that the true power of music lies not in its shine or polish, but deep within its battered soul. Now let us examine the collaborative performances and recordings that brought these titans together. One of the most remarkable yet frequently overlooked chapters in rock history took place when John Hammond managed to bring Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix together for a spontaneous jam session at New York's legendary Gaslight Cafe. This intimate venue, famous for nurturing the careers of folk and blues legends in the village, played host to a magical moment that even the most creative rock historian would struggle to believe actually happened. Here were two of the greatest guitarists of their generation, arguably of all time, standing side by side on a small stage. Hammond, who maintained deep personal friendships with both artists, orchestrated this historic event not for media publicity or financial gain, but for the sheer joy of witnessing something extraordinary. With Eric Clapton standing to his left and Jimi Hendrix to his right, Hammond fronted a band that night that would become the stuff of absolute rock and roll mythology. At the time of this impromptu performance, Hendrix had only recently returned from his meteoric rise to fame in London, while Clapton was already the established king of the British blues rock scene. The meeting was not defined by oversized egos or cutthroat competition, but by a deep mutual admiration and a shared religious reverence for the blues. Rather than fighting for the spotlight, Hendrix and Clapton played with a rare sense of telepathic synchronicity, trading licks with an effortless fluidity and responding to each other's unique phrasing like they had been bandmates for decades. Their playing was instinctive, sharp and responsive, creating a true musical conversation that unfolded beautifully in real time. Hammond later described the chemistry in the room as electric, noting how each guitarist enhanced the other's brilliance without a single word needing to be spoken between them. This jam session was significant, not just for who was on stage, but for the bridge it built between two different worlds of rock history. It wasn't merely the blinding wattage of celebrity talent illuminating the stage that night. Rather, it was the heavy, intoxicating atmosphere of absolute artistic anarchy that seemed to seep into the very woodwork of the room. Without the safety net of a rehearsal or the rigid constraints of a set list to hold them back, they were free to engage in a raw, unadulterated form of expression that few ever get to see. You have to understand that Clapton and Hendrix weren't putting on a polished spectacle for the flashing bulbs of the press or the cynical eyes of critics. They were playing solely for the visceral thrill of the music itself. It served as a retrospective masterclass in everything the blues represents: improvisational, deeply emotive and possessed of a communal spirit that borders on the painfully intimate. According to the legendary Hammond, both of these guitar gods, despite the mountains of hyperbole and adoration heaped upon them by the public, remained surprisingly grounded and devoid of pretension when the amps were buzzing. It was precisely this humility paired with their otherworldly genius that created a perfect storm for the fortunate few who managed to squeeze inside to witness history. The true tragedy, and perhaps the saving grace, is that not a single frame of this meeting was documented professionally, a fact that has only served to polish the legend to a blinding sheen. Instead, the narrative survives solely through Hammond's razor-sharp recollection and the hushed whispers of the attendees passed down like sacred texts through the rock and roll community. In many ways, the lack of evidence makes it the ultimate document of what music actually is at its core. When you strip away the massive egos and the weight of expectation, you are left with a language that transcends fame, fortune, and even the ravages of time, crystallising the fleeting power of shared artistry. It represented a fleeting yet momentous crossroads between two titans of the industry, a rare instance of finding them in such an unguarded, vulnerable, and authentically real state. The echoes of that gaslight jam still reverberate through the halls of history, standing as a testament to the sheer force music generates when it is fueled by nothing but passion and mutual respect. Flash forward decades later, and we see Clapton and Winwood stepping up to conjure that specific brand of Hendrix magic once again. It was back at the 2010 Crossroads Guitar Festival in Bridgeview, Illinois, where thousands of devotees witnessed a jaw-dropping resurrection of Jimi Hendrix's spirit as Eric Clapton and Steve Winwood reunited under the lights. When they launched into Hendrix's Voodoo Child, it was immediately clear that this was far more than a dutiful cover version to please the crowd. It was a visceral, chest-thumping tribute to the visionary who had single-handedly rewritten the vocabulary of the electric guitar, and for Winwood, the performance carried a heavy personal weight. You have to remember that over 4 decades prior, Winwood had been the young prodigy laying down the original organ tracks on Hendrix's monumental electric Ladyland record. Now standing shoulder to shoulder with Clapton, he was circling back to that hallowed material, closing a loop that had started in the swinging 60s. He brought a weathered, soulful maturity to the keys, adding fresh, complex layers of melancholy and fire to a song that was already etched into stone as an icon. The entire Crossroads Festival was vibrating with a heady mixture of reverence and jubilation, creating an electric charge in the air you could almost taste. This atmosphere was matched only by a level of musicianship so intense and precise that every person in the crowd, musician or not, felt the impact in their bones. For years, whispers had circulated that Eric Clapton had become comfortable, perhaps even predictable in his live sets, but that night he silenced every detractor by unleashing a fire that burned as hot as his reputation. Even with heavyweights like Jeff Beck, Buddy Guy and Derek Trucks on the bill, it was the chemistry between Clapton and Winwood that forged the most indelible memory of the entire evening. They didn't just gift the audience a scorching version of Voodoo Chili. They dug deep into the archives to deliver Traffic's Dear Mr. Fantasy as well. They even dusted off the Blind Faith classic Had to Cry Today, reminding everyone of their shared supergroup lineage. Yet, without a shadow of a doubt, the most incendiary moment of the set was their fearless tackling of that Hendrix masterpiece. It absolutely scorched the night sky, effectively rekindling the dangerous spirit of innovation and boundary pushing that Hendrix had always represented. Clapton's connection to Hendrix was always incredibly complex and intimate, born out of a mixture of fierce admiration, genuine friendship, and a shared belief in the transformative power of the blues. That invisible binding thread between the two guitarists was palpable in the air as Clapton and Winwood played as if the ghost of Jimi was nodding in approval. Clapton's vocal delivery was woven with a deep, aching soulfulness, while his fretwork displayed the kind of technical mastery that reminds you why he is a god. Meanwhile, Winwood's gritty, swirling organ lines filled every empty space, providing a heavy foundational texture that gave the song its menacing weight. Together, they didn't just play the notes, they captured the very essence of Hendrix's chaotic artistry. It was a fearless performance, emotionally ragged and connected to something raw and authentic, feeling less like a recreation of the past and more like a continuation of the story. It felt like a living, breathing homage, ensuring that Hendrix's musical spirit continued to evolve through the voices and hands of his peers. That performance at Crossroads 2010 stands tall today as a stark reminder that Hendrix's influence didn't simply vanish into the ether when he died. The greatest of his surviving torchbearers are still out there, ensuring that his wild spirit continues to live, breathe and scream through the amplifiers. For a man like Clapton, festivals like Crossroads aren't just traditional concerts. They are living memorials, a method of honouring the fallen friends who helped pave the road he still walks. This theme of reflection brings us to Clapton's track, The Call, which mirrors the introspection found in Hendrix's own catalogue. Eric Clapton's recent release, The Call, stands as a deeply personal and soulful confession, echoing the quiet, reflective spirit often associated with Jimi Hendrix's more tender works. Clapton has always possessed the uncanny ability to weave threads of blues rock and gospel into a seamless, comforting musical tapestry. With this song, Clapton taps into a universal vein of longing and the search for redemption that resonates with anyone who has lived a long life. Every single note feels as if it were chosen with agonising care, wrapped in a bittersweet melancholia that speaks to personal loss and the eternal search for meaning in the twilight years. It draws a direct parallel to Hendrix's own ventures into softer, more psychedelic territory, reminiscent of tracks like Little Wing or The Ethereal Angel. The Call offers the listener a stirring meditation on the nature of memory, the weight of regret, and the intangible magnetic pull of the past. Eric Clapton's voice on the track is detailed with the gravel and grit of age, projecting a resonant power that can only come from a life fully and sometimes painfully lived. When Eric Clapton steps up to deliver a track like The Call, he isn't just singing lyrics. He is practically bleeding pure emotion onto the recording, intensifying every single note. We are talking about a man with a voice that has been weathered by time, gritty aged yet surprisingly fragile, forcing the listener to confront a level of sincerity that you simply cannot ignore. The lyrics themselves paint a haunting picture filled with the ghosts of messages that never landed and the eerie sense of a presence you can feel but cannot see. Take that chilling line, for instance. Got a message last night, came through loud and clear, called you right back, but there's no one there. It sends shivers down your spine. It captures that specific brand of bone-deep isolation, the kind of haunting loneliness that Jimi Hendrix used to play with, like a dangerous toy in his own work. In fact, it feels as if Clapton isn't just reaching out to a former lover or a long-lost friend, but is actually trying to bridge the gap to the afterlife, perhaps signalling to the ghost of Hendrix himself. It is like a seance in sonic form, pulling a tight, invisible thread between the current moment and the heavy, echoing legacy of a musical past that still haunts us. The guitar work on The Call flies under the radar, but somehow dominates the room, proving once again that Slowhand has mastered the art of saying absolute volumes without screaming. Gone are the days of the flashy technical fireworks and ego-driven shredding that defined the wilder years of his early career. Instead, he completely goes to town with rich tones and endless sustain, using heavy, pregnant pauses to communicate feelings that are too deep for speed. It is eerily reminiscent of how Hendrix approached his softer personal ballads, where every string, bend and delicate vibrato carried a weight that the English language just couldn't support. Much like Jimmy did back in the day, Clapton is treating his instrument not just as a piece of wood and wire, but as a direct extension of his own tortured soul. He lets the guitar do the heavy lifting, filling in the heartbreaking voids where words fail, expressing those hard truths and enduring sadness that usually go unspoken. This is the kind of musicianship that demands more than just your ears. It requires you to physically feel every passage as a shared moment in the collective human experience. And while The Call might be a soft, lingering echo, the roar of Jimi Hendrix is still out there tearing down walls and reshaping the soundscape for generations to come. It is a massive legacy that continues to send shockwaves through every single era of music history. Even now, more than 50 years after we lost him way too soon, Jimi Hendrix's influence smashes through the barriers of time, genre and culture like they aren't even there. His absolute lack of fear and his sorcerer-like command of the electric guitar completely redefined what was physically possible in the world of music. He took things that were considered mistakes, distortion, feedback, raw noise, and transformed them into high art weaponizing electricity itself. To call Hendrix just a rock star is a massive understatement. It is like calling a hurricane a bit of wind. He was a straight-up visionary who rewired the entire nervous system of modern music, changing its soul forever. In an industry built on copycats and fakes, his authenticity was bulletproof, honouring the muddy roots of the blues while blasting them off to the surface of Mars. And the lyrics, deeply personal yet sharp as attack on social issues, tackled injustice, freedom and resilience, capturing the chaos of a turbulent era perfectly. By doing so, Hendrix forced the world to give long overdue respect to the black pioneers who laid the foundation for rock and roll in the first place. He used his massive fame as a battering ram against stereotypes, screaming to the world that creative freedom was not just a privilege, but a necessity. Spin a record today and the music remains as vibrant and relevant as the day it was cut, refusing to age a single day. Every new generation that discovers him peels back another layer, finding fresh meanings and hidden truths buried in the static. Tracks like Red House, Bold as Love, and the mind-bending If 6 Was 9 are constantly shape-shifting, proving these are living entities that evolve with the listener's own emotions. That 6-string machine in his hands could scream bloody murder one second and whisper a melancholic lullaby the next. He somehow managed to capture the entire spectrum of the human condition within the fretboard of a single guitar. Ask any guitar god playing today who their hero is, and the answer is almost always Jimi, proving that his spirit is still the one conducting the orchestra. But let's be real, Hendrix's impact stretches way further than just the music charts. His deconstruction of the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock remains a ghostly, wordless protest that still haunts the history books, a moment that ended abruptly in what he tragically called the wink of an eye. Yet the ghost of Jimi isn't gone. He gets louder and stronger every time a new artist has the guts to break the rules and sound different. We appreciate you hanging out with us. If this trip down memory lane sparked something in you, smash that like button, let us know your take in the comments, and make sure you subscribe for more deep dives into the scandals and secrets of music history. Hit that notification bell so you are always the first to know when we drop the next big story. And don't go anywhere, because we have another incredible video queued up right now on your screen. Click it and let's keep this vibe going.